outset of each debate. Then each speaker will give their remarks, so speaker 1, speaker 2. Then the moderator will lead a discussion. That will be followed by an audience Q&A. We'll have closing remarks, and then finally we'll have a vote at the conclusion of each debate, and potentially you will be persuaded to change your vote. So this morning, we'll have our first debate, then we'll have lunch. We'll come back at 1 o'clock, and we'll have following three debates, excuse me. So this morning, we have a debate about local apps versus cloud services, and we'll bring our guests onto the stage as we vote here. So please welcome to the stage Andreas Amados of Fileverse, Lefteris of Rotkey, and Mosh Lee of IPFS. And be it resolved, now is your chance to vote. Blockchain apps should prioritize local over cloud deployment. You can scan the QR code there, which many of you already have. And I'll give it like another 30 seconds for you to vote. Okay. So as it stands, we have 14 in the agree category, 7 in the disagree category, and 3 abstaining. Without further ado, here we go.
Hey everybody. So I'm Lefteris and I will introduce the topic. You'll excuse me, I have some notes here, so I will be using my phone. I'm sorry for that. So the topic is, if we resolve it as 4, that blockchain apps should prioritize local over cloud deployment. What does that mean? That basically means the concept of local first apps, that you try to keep everything, all of your data as much as possible locally for blockchain applications, instead of using the cloud for everything. But of course, you would use the cloud where required. So this is what we're going to be debating about. I mean, the debaters are going to debate about. We'll have on my left, Andreas from Fileverse. He will be arguing for this resolution. So Andreas is founder of Fileverse. If you have recently seen the released DDocs, which is basically alternative to Google Docs, a collaborative workspace. Do use it, it's pretty cool. He's also a doctoral researcher at the University of Oxford, focusing on human-machine teaming configuration for cybersecurity. And for the against part, we have Michelle Lee, that's also known as Moss. She works at the intersection of software systems and societies. She invented Google Forms, worked at Google, where she also contributed to Google Maps and Google Docs. So pretty much on the cloud, right? And she's a Code for America fellow, a GovTech founder, and head of developer program at Protocol Labs. Right now, she's working at IPFS Foundation and in libp2p governance. Yeah, so I think that for the next step, we will have each of the debaters introduce their position, right? So we should probably start with the 4 position. Andreas?
Yeah, I'm down. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. I just landed, so if at some point you see me lagging and looking elsewhere, just make some noise, look at me, tell me come back. So, for my introduction, I decided not to actually focus on the advantages, the clear advantages of local first software, meaning it's faster, you don't have that spinning wheel telling you, hey, your data is going across the earth and it's coming back. The security, the privacy preservation that local first software actually allows you to have. Instead, I'm going to focus on 2 rather more conceptual elements. in order to basically speak to the potential of local software as a movement and instill, hopefully in you, a sense that being local first is actually the pragmatic way of thinking about the future and not the idealistic way which most people like presenting it as. So I said two concepts. I see I have 3 minutes and a half, so I'll go fast. The first is context, the second is determinism. So for context, it can be summarized as such. Basically, there's never been a better time to actually focus on local first software and join the local first software movement. There are several reasons behind that. I'll cover just a few. One is there's been incredible improvement in memory capacity, in processing power, and more in our consumer hardware on average across the globe. And this is important. Why? Because it takes us away basically from the performance restrictions and conditional restrictions that basically brought us the big transition towards cloud services 10, 20 years ago. So one good example that I think I heard Vitalik talk about it at ETH Berlin is the main reason people move from Word to LibreOffice to then again to something centralized in Google Docs is they wanted collaboration. And that collaboration required at the time for you to actually depend on a server, a centralized server somewhere in California or whatever. It's not the case anymore. And the change in that reality is probably one of the core arguments for actually supporting local first software. Now, quickly, two other points in terms of context. One is we have a lot of new standards and primitives that came from 20 years of peer-to-peer tech development. I'll remind you that until 2010, a third of internet traffic was all peer-to-peer. And the second point, which is, sorry, this is what I mean by jet lag. Sorry. And the second important context is that actually today we can see cracks in the big clouds becoming more and more apparent. One point of reference here is that around 7 years ago, still 7 years ago, Facebook and Google would get an average fine of 50K a year by, for example, the CNIL, which is the French Data Protection Authority. Today, those fines can reach up to 3 billion. And believe me when I say that, it is an existential threat to those businesses, and they have no idea how to change their whole architecture away into something that actually protects privacy, gives people the ability to port their data, etc. Okay, 30 seconds, so last point. Those were the contextual points. Now a final point, maybe a bit of a philosophical interlude, which is about technological determinism. This is a reductive theory that came about 100 years ago and rocked the world of sociology, and it can be summarized as basically technology advances on its own will and by its own logic of efficiency, and it determines the development of our cultures and norms, and then not the other way around. And this is crucial, I'll stop here, because my point today is that we should put all cultural efforts as much as possible into prioritizing local first software and move away from the lazy take of, okay, everything is made easy for me to deploy a cloud-based app, so I'll do so. Voila. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Andreas. And now, Michelle will be basically introducing the against side of the argument.
Good morning, everyone. So you're all here because we're part of the Ethereum community, we're part of the broader blockchain community, and blockchain is at its heart, it's a coordination layer for the world's computers and all the people who use them and touch them and connect with them. So I think rejecting cloud out of hand is a bit premature, because why would we give up all the benefits of networking so easily, right? So I have a few things for you to consider, and maybe it will change your mind, maybe it won't, but hopefully it will wake us all up today. So really, I don't think local deployment is anywhere close to the most important thing if you're an app dev. The first is that there are so many things that your local hardware can't do, right? I am looking especially at the awesome DPIN projects that are taking off. Who's heard of Helium Mobile? Or WeatherXM? Or Huddle video conferencing, video calling, yeah. Filecoin, large-scale storage. So all of these things, like, they can't live in your phone, they can't live, like, do you have a weather station on your desktop? No. There are so many different things that we can take advantage of, hardware, physical networks across the globe that can't exist if we only confine ourselves to this local architecture, right? So the second is that if you're building an app that connects people, that needs to maintain live connections to a network, you're going to need resilient and probably hybrid architecture. And I'm not talking about, I think it's much easier for bursty, event-driven transactions, things like DeFi, to be mostly offline first or local first, and then occasionally connect to the network to sync or update state when necessary. I think that collaboration software, I think, Andreas is a pioneer, but there are so many times when you close your laptop and then connection breaks, right? So today, I think, in addition to the peer-to-peer network, we need some sort of fallback or a cloud-based backbone, at least for now, right? That's where we're at today. And if you look at the success of Blue Sky, Mastodon, Farcaster, all of the other, quote, decentralized social networks, they're actually running on hybrid or actually primarily cloud architecture. What makes them decentralized is that the data itself, the artifacts, are self-certifying. A lot of them use IPFS under the hood to achieve that. And so that makes it possible and also credible that the architecture is cloud for now, but it can be migrated or ported to be local first in the future. Or individuals can take that data and run their own instances, run their own servers if you want. But the majority of the network and the majority of the users are use cloud because of its convenience today. And the IPFS public network also works that way. So a lot of apps can bundle a node directly into the app, which is great. We have Audius, which is media streaming. We have a lot of other projects that bundle a full IPFS node directly into the desktop app. We have a lot more apps and services and websites that use IPFS through the browser itself. And we're pushing really hard on all the different transports and trying to get the major browsers to accept IPFS and handle the IPFS protocol natively. But until we get there, we still need the web-based gateways. So, finally, more than local versus cloud, I think what we need in the Web3 community is applications that matter in the real world. So apps that people are willing to pay for so that external capital flows into this ecosystem, and then the impact, the value, the benefits actually make their way beyond people who want to label themselves as part of the Web3 or part of the Ethereum or decentralized web movement. So, in conclusion, local deployment is not going to save your app. Product market fit is what's going to do it. And in fact, I have a challenge for you. I want you to consider going the rest of this week without saying the word decentralized. Maybe we can all try that. Instead, we can use words like people-powered, or we can use self-determined, or I'll try to think of other ways to describe what it is that the benefit is, rather than the software architecture, which is fascinating to us who work on it technically, but probably doesn't matter a lot to the rest of the world. Remember that 1% of the world's devs are blockchain devs, the other 99% aren't. And if we want to succeed, if we want to bring these values that are so important and beneficial, we have to cross that chasm. So, my last thing is that I think there's no such thing as a blockchain app. That's like saying we have a database app or a CRDT app. We have collaboration apps, we have financial data apps, we have all sorts of other kind of applications, but the defining thing shouldn't be that it's a blockchain app. The defining thing should be what it does for its users. So cloud, local, doesn't matter. Make your app count.
Thanks, Michelle. So with the introduction done, we can proceed to the questions. I saw from both of you kind of try to also define what it means to be a local or a cloud blockchain application. But I would like to ask it as a specific question. What does local or what does cloud mean for an application perspective for you, Michelle?
Oh, that's a great question. To me, local means that the data is primarily handled on the device that the user controls, or the device that an organization or company controls on premises. And then cloud to me means you don't care where it lives, and your first interaction is already kind of decoupling the physical location of what you're doing with where the hardware or the device is that it's happening.
Okay, and about prioritizing local versus cloud, it's basically this, right? Like to try to prioritize whatever is local. All right.
I'll be much more reductionist here. Local first is you have ownership and control over your data and the software that you're using. Cloud is the contrary. You have neither control, no ownership. That's it. You don't need much more. You don't need to compare the specs. One fundamentally takes away from you something that was understood as a given still 20 years ago, still 15 years ago for like gaming consoles or stuff like that. And now we're into a world where basically we are renting our own personal data. We're renting our own most essential tools, like writing on a freaking document. Can you imagine? Like 20 years ago, I can understand that this maybe needs for collaborative capabilities to go and be managed by a third party, etc. It's not the case anymore.
All right. In which cases do you guys think it makes sense to prioritize local versus cloud today for not only blockchain applications, but I guess since the topic is blockchain, we can focus on that. Michelle?
Let's look at it from a very pragmatic point of view. I think Andreas is right. There's local first software is getting more efficient, right? It's working better. There's more tools for it. And to the extent that you don't have to send data over a network, don't do it, right? But there are many cases where you might still have to, at least today. And I think AI is a field that is going to be really interesting for this local versus cloud dichotomy, if you will. Today, the big models are all online. So if you want to access generative AI, you have to send it somewhere else. There's, computing's getting more efficient. Projects like the Interplanetary Virtual Machine IPVM are moving more compute into local first environments. But today, to access those benefits, you still have to go to the cloud. And you have to compromise your privacy to do that, right? But there are new technologies like fully homomorphic encryption, FHE, that basically ensure privacy over data while giving you the ability to still compute over it. So I actually had a legal document that I wanted some analysis on, so I thought, well, let me upload it to Claude. Then I changed my mind because I didn't want Claude to have access to it. But if there were a cloud-based FHE-enabled service, I probably would have done that. I would have trusted it more and taken advantage of the larger scale compute and the shared model that it was building over time.
If I may ask, so FHE would make you trust more a cloud-based service, right? What about it? Just the fact that a company would say in a very confident manner, hey, we're taking good care of the encryption, we process your data and do some stuff on your encrypted data without actually revealing any personal information. Is that enough, or do you need also maybe the code to be open source? Or maybe you need also the company to be public? Or do you need, is it just the claim that something is happening and your privacy is preserved? Or is it 10, 15 steps with that claim?
I don't think it's 10, 15 steps. It's probably 2 more steps, right? Like, we're all kind of skeptics here. That's why we go back to computers to do some of our work for us. And I think, you know, making the claim that FHE is used and also being either open source or audited would be sufficient for me.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something?
Mm-hmm.
What do you use to take photos?
My phone.
Yeah, do you consider your Photos app to be a local app or a cloud app?
Local.
Yeah.
Is it not?
I think you have to disable syncing.
I don't have iCloud.
Ah.
No, I got freaked out when I was 14 and I saw a big celebrity leak that came from iCloud, and I was like, no.
What kind of photos are in here?
No, it was the news. It wasn't. I was 14. Okay.
But what happens if you drop your phone into the ocean?
I have usually process. I'm the worst person to ask those questions to. I know that I'm not the average Joe, but I back up everything on another hardware. I have a bunch of them at home. One is always with my mother. I update it once a year. So yeah, I scatter those things around. But even in that example, I think that there are so many good developments happening in, okay, sync your phone with your computer without necessarily even having Wi-Fi on. You can just do it over Bluetooth, Bluetooth mainly. I think AirDrop uses Bluetooth or their own weird implementation, something similar. Now, just to go back to what you were asking, except if you have a...
No, because I see that we kind of jumped topics. I want to make sure that, do you have anything else to say on the when should you prioritize local versus cloud and vice versa?
Why we should?
When? In which cases?
In all cases, you should prioritize local first software. I don't believe in the scope creep of, okay, yeah, but today we're doing VR and we're doing metaverse, so we need to depend on those cloud services. No, that's a trap. That's a trap. It's the same people and narrative that took away the split screen, 4 people playing Halo in the same room together and passing a game around and passing a console around, to the current reality, which kids nowadays, I say kids, I'm in my 20s, but kids nowadays don't even know they find it weird even not to have their own device in order to play with people. And this is the point I was trying to make with the technological determinism sidestep there. It's a limitation on our imagination. From the moment that we're always in a position of compromise where we're like, yeah, but cloud is so much easier and there's so much tech for developers, for the average consumers, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but this is how you always remain in a path dependency, in a tech path dependency that becomes harder and harder to actually escape. So because I'm talking to a crypto crowd, because I'm talking to a crowd that understands the importance of at least trying hybrid models, I insist that you should always go with local first software as your immediate reaction. And indeed, if there is not enough infrastructure for you to actually deliver good consumer experiences, first you try to build it yourself. I know it's very privileged to say something like that, but you are the right crowd. And then you compromise if you need to, but you should feel bad about yourself.
Nice. Okay. But still, you can compromise then if there is something like Michel mentioned already, a very good example, like AI, LLM apps, I suppose, that is very hard to do locally, right? Okay, there are some models that you can train locally, blah, blah, but Have you tried it? Because I haven't. I was a bit disappointed.
I am also quite disappointed. There are some good teams that help you take advantage of every device you have in a home, puts them together, creates a little cluster, and actually allows you to have a better backend for your LLM. But even in this example, sorry, but again, it's the same trap. There is a fabulous paper by a Google Brain Project employee called Sarah Hooks. The paper is called, I think, The Hardware Lottery. And it talks about the transition from CPU-dominated world to GPU-dominated world. And how today, even researchers, good researchers at good universities, are unable to use years of accumulated CPUs for even their most basic AI research. Why? Because within the past 10 years, we've had such a big focus on deep learning driven by very resourceful actors from big corporations to big countries, that we think that this is the only way of actually doing things. It's getting more difficult to actually acquire a CPU, and we're leaving out most people or organizations or countries that cannot access the very heavy and expensive resources like GPU. And so now we're always thinking of, yeah, but you can't have AI locally. Yeah, because we killed the research path that actually allowed us to see if it was possible to accelerate the local development of AI and use of AI.
Okay.
Voilà, sorry, tangent.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I guess the point that you're trying to make is that we can fall into traps, right?
Yeah.
All right. Because we're running out of time, it would be nice to slowly move to other topics. You, both of you actually touched on security and privacy concerns of local versus cloud. And you, Michel, talked about how cloud can actually still help us here with homomorphic encryption. Do you have any other thing to add about the privacy and security concerns for cloud versus local?
I think that it's worth modular, like understanding that there's a lot of projects now are starting to decouple different phases of your application. So you can outsource, like Filecoin, for example, has introduced a Snarks as a service. You can outsource just that part of the compute, right? So I think we can also, as we design our local first or hybrid or cloud apps, you can think about which pieces really need to stay local and which pieces really need to be outsourced. And I think the options for making an independent choice for each module are increasing. But there's another trap we can fall into, which is the DevTools trap, which I think like a lot of crypto has fallen in, has gotten sidetracked by, which is, you go back and forth, you want to build an app, but you can't build your app because you don't have the right DevTools. So you then switch to building DevTools. But when you're building a dev tool and you only have your own use case in mind, or you actually aren't interacting with real world users and usage and all the ways that an app can break, then your dev tool becomes incomplete, and then it makes it harder for people to use. So there are a handful of teams, I think, that are able to tread this very narrow line of building infrastructure and apps at the same time. Probably the Blue Sky and App Proto community is one of them that's doing a really good job. I'd shout out Huddle as well, who have built DRTC, but they're kind of investing in that a little bit after they invested in the app first. And I think, Andreas, like you and your team are also doing similar things, right? You've got the app, you're also building tools. Maybe in the future we'll see some of you open source and promote some of the tools that you're using.
All right. Do you want anything to add on security and privacy concern, or because you already mentioned it,
yeah.
sort of?
I think this is the point where it's difficult to argue that cloud solutions are better for security. 15 years ago, it was a very convincing argument. Don't have your on-premise servers actually depend on Google and all that. Today, like, you can think of, and we've seen so many attack vectors just around cloud services, from a disgruntled employee to PLA hackers to actually the NSA putting a backdoor in most of our essential apps and servers, to too many, whereas local, yes, it's not infallible. You can still lose your data, lose your money, whatever. If you update your app and the new update was actually compromised, you can get screwed. But the attack vectors are simply 10 times smaller. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So another concern that is troubling developers and users when going between choosing a local or a cloud app is how the hell, and you actually touched on it, do I move data between two devices? Because no matter how hardcore you are, you will probably have to change a computer at some point or move between mobile and cloud. So I guess that cloud does have a competitive advantage here. So would you like to touch on this a bit more, or like how cloud and local handle availability of data syncing, etc.?
Yeah, when we think of moving data between computer devices, you think of like my phone and my laptop, or my laptop and my desktop, and that's not really enough devices to form a network, really. So you can do a single transfer, but it's not enough to have the resilience of a network. How many nodes, how many computers, devices do you need to make that resilient enough for the world? And IPFS has hundreds of thousands of nodes forming our global public network, and even then we need sometimes the cloud-based fallback, the gateway. But there are projects that are providing really good frameworks for doing this. IRO is one. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. It's an IPFS-based system for syncing between devices. So again, it's also a hybrid design.
How did you call it?
IRO, IROH.
Oh, okay.
And it's a toolkit for that connectivity layer. And it prioritizes the peer-to-peer connection if it can be established, but also it has kind of a server backbone if you can't find that device.
All right. Andreas?
I would put forward that whenever you think that your final solution left is cloud service, it's AWS or it's Microsoft, Azure, just think peer-to-peer networks first. Something we're trying at Favos and DDoS, and it's been working pretty well so far, although it requires a lot of optimization. I won't hide that from you. You can depend on, like you said, the IPFS has what, 300,000 nodes, something like that. You should try to depend as much as possible on peer-to-peer networks that can actually ensure that your data gets fragmented, secured, and distributed across a network with enough redundancies for you to be sure or feel okay about your data always having a backup, which is not your local devices, but are not either a big Californian company. It can be distributed across thousands of nodes in a way that gives you enough guarantees that you can recover it at some point. And today, we have community computers called public blockchains. You have Ethereum, you have Gnosis, you actually have the perfect additional layer for those peer-to-peer networks to provide an incentive layer to make sure that this guarantee that your data is available is right there. But you also have things like identity, an objective identity that lives on-chain, that allows you to actually prove that, okay, I don't have any of my devices anymore, but I still have access to on-chain identity. And that on-chain identity allows me to retrieve information, decrypt information from a peer-to-peer network that is not the blockchain itself, but might be IPFS, might be GunDB, might be rsync, whatever.
But so let me grab onto that a bit, because we're slowly running out of time, and I really want to touch another point of the discussion, which is exactly on this. For blockchain apps, we have an issue that we have many blockchains, many EVM chains, and if we want to say local first, we do have another problem, like how does development tooling do indeed agree with the local first concept when you want to integrate with 10 EVM chains, then another 10 side chains? Do you really do that local first, or there do you have to compromise? Like, what does it really mean to be local first in a place where we have a gazillion chains, essentially?
It's a great question. I don't think that this is going to be a very long-term problem. I'm really optimistic about this being solved in the next 2-3 years. Now, currently, I would answer by saying that there is a spectrum of local first apps. On the far left of local first, you might have things like Rodkey app. A bit further, you have hybrid approaches like DDocs that combine both peer-to-peer networks and a central node somewhere you can call a server, and a web app with a light client that allows you to run software or retrieve your data without actually pinging any server. And then you have web apps, and then you have further away cloud services. So somewhere there you do a compromise. You're not fully Rodkey, but you're going into, okay, there's something still that I need to retrieve from centralized places.
Yeah. Just a small note, like Rodkey is pretty much in the middle because it keeps the data local, but by default it basically connects to open nodes. We have felt this problem a lot because you can't. Michel, the question is basically about development tooling and working in local, in blockchain apps. How can developers essentially solve this problem of blockchains essentially having exploded in number? Like we have all the super chain chains, then we have side chains. Can you do this indeed local first, or?
And you have to fetch like data from 25 different sources. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think there's more oracles, there's more on-chain aggregators. I think it's actually up to the app devs to tell the L2s like what you need, right? And I think we see a lot of L2s growing, and I think our infrastructure has gotten ahead of our use cases in this situation.
Yeah, it has it has exploded. It's really crazy.
Because you're the expert on that, what do you use actually, or what did you consider in order to not centralize it as much as possible?
The user, give them agency. They decide. Etherscan, they connect to Etherscan, they use their own keys. Open nodes, whatever exists, we try to connect to it. Configurability. If they want to run their own node, they do it, but 95 out? Maybe it's 99% of our users, they just don't run their own nodes.
Yeah.
They mostly care about their data being private. The connecting on nodes is just whatever, just get
the
me
public
the data.
data doesn't matter as much, right?
Yeah. I guess there were other questions that wanted to go, but should we go to the Q&A, or do we have more time? Okay, we should go to the Q&A. All right, let's do that then.
How does it work? Good morning.
Good morning.
I wonder, over the last decades, the main problem I see that there's been billions invested into developer experience, or making that easy for developers, and also education of developers. We see certification and university courses and so on. The same didn't happen for local first development. So how can we, obviously there's nobody going to direct these funds into local first development. How can we actually make sure that more funds are allocated to local first development, education, and developer tooling?
You let the regulators do their job. I know they're slow, but it's coming quite fast. I can tell you that most big tech companies that are operating in Europe do not consider their fines operational costs anymore. They consider them existential threats to their businesses. And this actually drives incentives towards an alternative that is more future-proof. And I do believe that this is towards a local first and hybrid model software. So I think there is a natural incentive there for money to be allocated. The second is you have industries like ours that need to be spearheading this change. We're lucky enough to be full of idealistic and hopeful people that actually grinded their ways for a decade in order to make censorship-resistant and permissionless money a thing. I'm sure they can extend that appreciation to more use cases, which would require more funding, like you suggested, more development tooling to be directed towards those types of apps.
I think you bring up a great question, though, because the reason all these cloud companies invest in education is so they can, cultivate users that will pay them thousands and millions of dollars in 2 or 3 years. And you don't have the same incentives on local first developer tools because it's, mostly open source and locally run. So I think the public sector and also community-driven public goods funding are going to be have to be some of the sources for that because you don't have that giant financial payoff in the end.
Yeah. Actually, it's a great point. We emerged 2 years ago thanks to Gitcoin. I know that Gitcoin is quite important to Rodkey as well. Within 6 months, we had over 10,000 donors. Not only is it an incentive, a financial one, the amount of encouragement that you get just from a community actually pushing you a little bit instead of having a big company telling you, hey, here's a grant, go try your stuff, is quite important. And on the other side, they have counter incentives. Again, they have fines, they have leaks constantly, they have big hacks, they have this summer, we were all incapable of using Microsoft Office for 5 hours. It cost trillions to the world economy. That's a super powerful counter incentive to consider for our cause. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. I heard the hybrid a lot. I just landed as well. I heard hybrid a lot from Michel, Andreas as well. And I want to understand what's the definition of this concept of hybrid. Is it a blockchain-specific concept or a crypto-specific concept? Is Rodkey app also a hybrid app? What's hybrid for each one of you?
That's a very good question, actually. This would be my question if we didn't have any other questions. Good. So what is a hybrid app? Maybe Michel, you can start. Like, what would be a hybrid between local and cloud? What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's not a very specific term to this question. To me, it just means that you're making choices and taking the best out of both worlds.
Just to add something, the two words are so you have local
And cloud.
Take something from that and cloud.
Cloud,
Okay.
yeah.
And the blockchain there is on the local side?
Well, another way to think about cloud is delegated, right? It's just you've outsourced the computation or the storage or the hardware to another place.
Would you agree? I'm not sure I would agree because you can delegate while still having a software that passed the walk-away test. Mm-hmm. The whole team dies tomorrow, but the app and data is still available. But it's been delegated to a peer-to-peer network where the end user can actually authenticate themselves without ever hitting the server of whatever app service they've been using. So I think it has something about ownership in there that we could point towards. For me, hybrid is, I think Michel's definition is quite right. For this specific conversation, I would say that it's a mix between leverage peer-to-peer networks, leverage, if you must, but be ashamed of centralized servers somewhere. Web app, ideally a web app with a light client that allows you to actually have some data right there on your browser rather than need to ping a server for appending some data or even doing a lookup. Plus The blockchain, which I think is a layer that we're underestimating, but it's incredibly powerful. From identity to consensus to actually, probably in the near future, key store solutions that are much more powerful, etc. So a mix of all those.
All right. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Like cats, I guess.
One more question. You mentioned a couple of times collaboration has led, or the need for collaboration between users has led to the cloud being used more. I would actually argue that the misconception is that 99% of usage is not live collaboration of any app, right? It's 1%. But this 1% drives lots of developers to focus on cloud because that makes collaboration so easy in their eyes, whereas 99% of the usage would easily be possible using local first principles, and then the 1% could certainly use, like in hybrid approach you guys mentioned, cloud functionality. So making that switch in their minds will already help to propel them to use more local focused principles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you see how that 1% feature convinced the whole world, hey guys, actually come towards our little centralized, closed, obscure, dark cloud. Because you get this amazing feature, which is open collaboration with the rest of the world without any restrictions. But in reality, most of the activity is things that do not need any cloud anywhere there. But because it's businesses that are naturally so profit-driven, they very quickly start cutting back on the actual preferences of the users in order to put forward, okay, what are the best architecture to actually preserve our business, make it grow, make it monopoly, whatever. Yeah.
Michelle, do you have anything to add on this? What was the question exactly? I didn't really also, for the others.
It was more a point to make clear, because collaboration is always mentioned, but there is a difference between asynchronous collaboration, like I push some data and then somebody else should access that data a day later, or live collaboration where we're talking about a soft real-time interaction between users. And actually making that switch in the developer's eyes, that this 1%, the difficult live collaboration part, this shouldn't drive your initial development. I guess that's more of the point I made.
I think in the past we have not really had good tools for managing and syncing state for anything other than code. So Git exists, it works great. You do your work locally, and then there are many different ways to sync state and track history across the workflow. But if you imagine like someone editing video, we don't have these finer grained tools for tracking changes and syncing state. This is something that IPFS can be really good at, actually, because the data gets broken into chunks, and then you can manage sync just the smaller chunking. But in all of the industrial uses I can think of, video editing, like GIS files, large data sets, I think the tools for that are immature, and that's what drives a lot of devs to go cloud first, because we don't have to think about syncing. We know it's always going to be accurate. But that's probably an opportunity for this community.
All right. Yeah, I think that we're running out of time. Like, we have run out of time. So the next step would be the closing remarks from the speakers. So for or against, let's maybe start as we started in the beginning, like from Andreas.
First, just I'm going to drop a resource. If any of the conversation today captivated you, there's an amazing article by Martin Kleppmann called, I think it's called Local First Software, actually. Yeah. Where it's on a website which I absolutely love. It's our Bible in the team. It's called Ink and Switch, And you can have a really nice overview of CRDTs, of spec comparisons between local softwares and cloud apps, etc. So go check it out. Second is, I would urge you to always try and think not about scalability as an end goal, but what your users want as the end goal. And what your users want is usually much more aligned with local first software values than cloud-based solutions. I'm going to stop with this. I think that's it. Maybe one last thing. If you want to get your hands on a hybrid approach type app to this, there's one called ddocs.new. It's ours. Go try it out. It's easy to access also on your phone. You don't need an account. And it gives you a nice little taste of what we've been talking about today. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Michelle, what about the closing remarks for the
Oh, this is
cloud?
just a very nihilist statement. Your architecture doesn't matter until your users and your use case and the problems that you solve do. So don't even worry about it. Identify a problem that matters. Identify an audience that will get so mad at you if your software disappears that proves the value. And from there, you can decide how to hybridize or how to design a local first or cloud-based or delegated architecture.
Is it possible to switch afterwards? You go full in as a cloud app, you get a lot of users.
I think you have to design it from the start to, you have to future-proof it. And you do that by, I think, having self-certifying data, by designing things to exist and work well, whether it's local or cloud first.
All right. Then I guess that's all, right?
Everyone, please give a round of applause to our debaters. That was a fantastic debate. Thank you so much. And now, let us vote again. Be it resolved, blockchain apps should prioritize local over cloud deployment. You can scan the QR code. We'll give you 2 minutes to vote.
Can we vote?
I changed my opinion already.
Oh.
Is anybody here developing local first software? 3, 4, 5, 6 people.
Tell us about it.
Yeah?
Maybe just really quick, your name, the app name, and what it does.
One here is Rodkey. One here is one of my favorites, Autoscan.
Others? Because there were other people behind.
The whole suite, that's basically what drives us.
Okay.
Can you say the name again now that you have the mic?
Saito, S-A-I-T-O.
Yes.
So just come to saito.io. The whole thing is, like you say, light client in the browser, direct connection to the chain, so it's a proper node. Data is transmitted in transactions across the network, but then we also can step off that for live streaming, etc. But encryption is done, and location is done by the chain. So that's what we
Super
built.
interesting.
Swarm. Oh, sorry. Swarm.
Sword.
Swarm.
Swarm.
Swarm from
Swarm. Okay.
Yeah.
Swarm. Yeah, I know. Okay, very cool.
I mean, we have the founder there.
I represent Hopper, the Hopper network. We are building a private transport layer. So obviously, being privacy oriented, it has to be local to the user.
Okay, beautiful. Are you also building Gnosis VPN?
Do you know Sebastian?
Can I be very provocative here?
Oh
Please.
yes, please.
So isn't this the case that this dichotomy of whether you use local apps and cloud services completely evaporates if you take the whole Ethereum ideal of Web3? So the Ethereum of Web3 is basically full stack decentralization, which means that computation, storage, serving, messaging, everything runs on a serverless peer-to-peer network. If you were running a cloud on a peer-to-peer service network, then basically as a local node, you're part of the game. You're your cloud yourself. That's one hand, which makes the dichotomy somewhat vague. And the other thing is, the moment you start using encryption and end-to-end encryption and proper access control, then the cloud is yours. The cloud is local to you. I know it's not local in the strict sense of, for example, in the terms of video editing and these kind of problems. It's obviously a hardware problem of access. But in terms of anything related to privacy, ownership, and risk mitigation, basically, you can use your cloud as your private storage extension. You can use the cloud's computation as your private computation. There's already solutions and enough infrastructures for this. So I'm wondering, like, exactly in the context of Ethereum and our much coveted future Web3, is this question not completely moot?
So the question, I guess, then is, when the cloud is comprised of a peer-to-peer network like Ethereum, isn't basically the blockchain a cloud, and then is the question basically moot, right? I mean, coming from you, from the Swarm Foundation, I guess this makes sense. You guys want to touch on it, Michelle, maybe?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Michelle.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. We are the cloud. If you run a node, you're part of a cloud. I think that the downsides of the cloud, the centralization and the central control and central, ownership and use and possibly misuse of data is the problem, right? I don't think it's really the cloud that's the problem, it's the centralization, so.
Yeah, agreed. I think maybe it was a misnomer. We were focusing mainly on the known cloud, the centralized cloud, where yes, you can also have end-to-end encryption on it and actually make sure that nobody else will have access to the data but you. But the app can disappear. Even if you downloaded all your data before the app disappeared, then you cannot run the software on your own if the server is not serving it to you anymore in that centralized cloud-based paradigm which we're in today. That was one point. So there is still aspects of control there. And the second is, it's more of a remark. You reminded me of this diagram. I think it came from Gavin Wood, where he describes the ideal state of Ethereum, where you have different parties interacting with each other. And if I remember the graph correctly, the end user always connects back to their local storage. And on the left, they have Swarm. On the right, they have Whisper. In the middle, they have Ethereum. And basically trying to put in a schematic form what you've been saying. But even there was a separation being made with, okay, you have your local storage as an end user, and you have those things that allow you to have control over your data in a decentralized fashion with guarantees for the future. But it's still, there is a difference with having it just locally.
How much you want to use your local resources as opposed to foreign resources. Basically, your risk mitigation against power cuts or whatever. So it's like a bit uninteresting. But I agree with you that in the context of centralized cloud, this debate made a lot of sense, but it was a bit old hat in a sense from my perspective, because exactly in this context of the Ethereum Devcon, we've surpassed this stage and actually made this question in the larger context somewhat irrelevant.
But also let me chime in a bit here, because I also see it from the perspective of someone building local first apps and wanting to be as good as possible, but having to do many go towards a hybrid model exactly because we have built this beautiful chain. We have the data inside. I run my own node. I run an archive node. Yet, because the founders of Ethereum made many very serious mistakes in the beginning that we are still paying for, I cannot query my transaction hashes. I cannot see what blocks my validators have proposed. I cannot see what withdrawals my validators have made. The only way to do this is to use an indexer. And then they all start co-opting this data, and they become, like you have Paradigm saying, okay, let's go against outside of logs. Let's get rid of the logs. We have shadow logs.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Paradigm has invested in the shadow logs, etc. So they're moving everything to some different kind of thing. That's.
I totally agree with you, but two remarks. One of them is obviously the solution is or maybe nail down your hand not to be able to look for drugs. And
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's obviously you're right. This shouldn't subvert the cause of decentralization and therefore independent, like middleman independent sovereign infrastructure. And then the solution is, of course, verification of the indexes. It's very simple. It's already known thing how to do in Swan. So verification is protecting against power indexes. And in general, the problem for this is obviously a cloud that's best to natively integrate it to the Ethereum.
Yeah.
It's connected to the Ethereum platform. So basically Ethereum's cloud, but not in the same sense as Google's cloud, but it's our cloud, just Ethereum flavored. And you're right in that this would be an unwelcome change but people already rely on Infura. I mean, Infura is benevolent, but it's our luck, right?
Yeah.
And maybe Tony Dukesh users would actually contend with what I said, that Infura is actually benevolent, but we're not going to this controversial debate. So thanks.
All right, thank you.
Lots of provocations, an incredible debate, many great questions. Let's continue the conversation in the garden or at lunch. We'll come back at 1 o'clock today. At the outset of the debate, we had 14 in the agree category, we had 7 in the disagree category, and we had 3 in the abstain. And at the conclusion of the debate, we have 20 in the agree category, 5 in the disagree, and 3 in the abstain. So essentially the same at the outset and the conclusion here. So it was a very great discussion, but not too persuasive, perhaps. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you this afternoon at 1 o'clock.